Okay, well, welcome this afternoon. We're so glad that you could make it to join us today. I know that my part of the country is having a little bit of severe weather, so we're definitely going to be recording the webinar today. My name is Tracy Sempier, and I am the Vortex Southeast Outreach and Engagement Coordinator. And today we're so excited to have Justin Sharp with us. He's going to be sharing about tornado tales. I wanted to just quickly give you an overview of what Vortex Southeast is and what we do. And I'm going to move to the next slide. We are a partnership between the National Severe Storms Lab and the Mississippi-Alabama Sea Grant. So I'm a Sea Grant Extension Specialist, and so is Christiana Allen, who will be helping us with the Q&A later during the presentation. And Justin sits in Norman, Oklahoma, and he is at the National Severe Storms Lab. This partnership came about as a way to integrate Vortex research into practical on-the-ground applications. And we wanted to do our best to avoid extractive research, and we try to do a lot of participatory action research. So all of the concepts and the research that are and the data that's collected at the Severe Storms Lab through the Vortex program then gets placed into the hands of end users and very specific targeted audiences on the ground that Christiana and I meet at various locations, such as severe weather trainings and expos. We also have been encouraging collective inquiry and experimentation, and it's grounded in the histories of the communities that we've been serving here in the Southeast. We do have a team of folks. It's not just the two of us that are on here, the three of us that are on here today. Excuse me. We do have other folks. And so you'll see Alan, Kenzie, Tony, Justin, and Cody are all in Norman, Oklahoma at the Severe Storms Lab. And then LaDon, Christiana, Steve, and I are all in the Southeast at various locations. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker for today, who is Dr. Justin Sharp. And I wanted to make sure we put his bio up here just so that we also have it in the recording, and that way you can see it as we go along. But Dr. Sharp is part of the Cooperative Institute for Severe and High Impact Weather Research and Operations. And he's also the Social Science Coordinator for Vortex USA. His research aims to improve understanding of factors that most affect the survivability of tornadoes. He leads engagement with stakeholders where co-production of knowledge and learning are at the heart of his research activities, and that includes the partnership he has here with us at Sea Grant Extension. He's the project coordinator for the NOAA NSSL Citizen Science web instrument that he's going to be speaking about today, called Tornado Tales, and it enables people to anonymously report their tornado experiences. He also conducts field work following high-impact tornadoes to better understand how individuals and communities anticipate, cope with, and recover from such events. So we're so glad to have you here with us, Justin. And just a quick reminder to participants as we change over screens here, there is a Q&A at the bottom. And if you will leave all of your questions for Justin, then at the end, Christiana is going to be reading those questions out to him, and hopefully we'll be able to get all of those answered. So without further ado, Justin, take it away. And we can see your screen great.
Yeah, good. So just confirmation that you can both see me and hear me. Perfect. Thank you. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm very pleased and very excited to be here. On the next slide, I'll actually tell you exactly what we're going to do today. Thankfully, Tracy has introduced me, which means I don't have to go and tell you again that I'm at SERA and the NSSL. This little graphic here, I think, is quite useful because if you're in the area, you know the area. If you're in the Southeast, you've all heard of tornado watches, warnings, and even a tornado emergency. But what I wanted to show that actually with this little graphic, although they're decreasing in time scale as you get closer and closer, they're also increasing the threat to livelihoods and property. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is known broadly from the social behaviour and economic sciences and what that tells us, what the fatal vulnerabilities are in the Southeast, a bit of tackling an overview of social vulnerability, how that then plays into the wicked societal problems that tornadoes pose. And then that brings us to the rationale for Tornado Tales. Why did we do it? What are we trying to gain from it? What's the point of it? And then I'll take you through a guided tour of the website and show you, what it does, so that help the publics also understand this as well. And then I'll show how we use that data, and then how we use fieldwork to find out whether the questions we're asking are easily understood, and also if there are any gaps, and how we iterate then so that we can actually improve on things for the future. So with that in mind, this is some of the prior research. Now, I know there's a lot of information here. I'm just trying to highlight broadly exactly what has gone on before, because there's been a lot of research done in this area for a number of years, but specifically in the social, behavioural and economic sciences. And actually, not exclusively, but the Vortex Southeast programme, which is now Vortex USA, has funded a lot of this research, certainly since around about 2015. And so a lot of this research, some of it's before, some of it's afterwards, has come out of this. So what do we know then thus far, or what have we learned thus far? Well, we know that nocturnal tornadoes can be a problem. And those that are considered or perceived to be outside of a traditional tornado season. I'm sure if any of you have been watching the news, watching the weather, they will be talking and ramping up this idea of, tornado season is upon us. And people generally tend to think about things in terms of tornado seasons. But also we've found that there are nocturnal tornadoes and ones occurring outside of a season, which then become a surprise. But often are, the long track tornadoes that cause huge amounts of damage, huge amounts of loss of life and destruction and economic impacts as well. These threats negatively impact populations in the region who are vulnerable to tornado threats, and we'll get into what that vulnerability is. As you might understand, during the overnight hours, during the nighttime hours, people are less confident in getting that information and feeling that information is going to get to them, that wakes them up maybe as well, because sometimes people are asleep when these things occur, and then allowing them to get to their safe space. So that's something that's kind of important. And then we've got Lyndon and Perry, who posit that outside influence is needed to begin decision making. So in other words, a weather service, an emergency management, a TV station telling you, you know what, this is going to threaten you. It might be now, it might be at this point, but you need to be aware. But then also people do something as well. They use those, although that news media is used for the information, they take that one step further and actually think about what their peers might be doing and what other local authorities might be doing as well. In a form of technological milling half the time as well, sort of checking on different social media outlets. Or is it true? Is it going to impact me? Do I have to worry? Do I have to act? More to the point. So, how tornadoes are warned, how they're communicated to people, and then finally received by the public, alongside the protective actions available to that public, is of interest to weather forecasters, emergency managers, and others from across the weather enterprise. But actually, it's also mainly of interest to those people who are going to be impacted and having to act or not able to act, maybe because of the situation that they're in. So I've just put this on one slide. So this is from some unpublished graphs that I put together when I first came in the job back in 2019 to early 2020. I looked at all of the data from the Storm Prediction Centre and actually looked at the impacts in terms of fatalities, because actually you need to understand those fatalities to also understand the survivability of tornadoes as well. And so I'm sure this doesn't come to a surprise to many of you, that mobile manufactured homes make up at least, and I say at least 50% of the fatalities, quite a lot. Recently, in March 2023, which is just over a year ago now, the tornadoes that impacted Rolling Fork, Silver City and Amory in Mississippi, 70% or 16 out of the 23 fatalities in those particular events were in mobile manufactured homes. It is not something that's new. It's not something that's not known, but it is something that adds some complexity and adds social vulnerability to some of the things that we want to know and we need to understand, so that we can excuse me, so we can do something about them. So that brings us to social vulnerability. Now, again, I'm going to take a big overview of this. The big overview is it comes from the disaster literature that goes back, many years, but certainly to 2004, which is about 20 years ago now, which is making me feel very, very old. The characteristics of a person or a group and their situation that influence their capacity to anticipate, cope with, resist, or recover from the impact of a hazard. And that's quite nice. It's quite a large kind of view of things. But, what does that actually mean? Well, it's about population groups, population dynamics in terms of socioeconomic groupings that underscore those vulnerabilities. And that directly underscores the survivability of things as well, and certainly also the injuries that are felt as well. And I'm going to just zoom in on one sort of thing here. This is a map. I pulled this down this morning from the CDC, this map, because I had a slightly outdated map. But this map shows from the CDC the percentage of the US population by county in poverty. And one thing I wanted to kind of draw your attention to, I'm a geographer, so maps are important to me, is that many of those darker colors, and the darker colors in this are higher percentages living in poverty, are there in the southeastern United States, are in the region 4 area that many of us live and work in. And so it's important to actually understand that those social vulnerabilities, and which poverty is a metric, if you are poorer, perhaps you have less choice over your choice of rental accommodation. And so that might be in less, well prepared rental accommodation. And that also might include mobile manufacturing home. Also, you've got transient populations who might be traveling to different rural areas as well around harvest time, or working in like meat preparation places and things like that. But our broad picture for social vulnerability is to look at the inequities of gender, ethnicity, financial security, the housing type, disability, even access to social networks as well. That's a really, really important thing. And the research that I'm writing up at the moment, I'm writing up a manuscript on the Rolling Fork tornadoes, and I'm about 85% through there. That social network was incredibly important into helping save people's lives when formal warning systems didn't get through to their intended audience. It wasn't they weren't issued, it just didn't get through to their intended audience, but it was gap filled by the public, who then were paying attention in other places, who then told friends, families, colleagues in those areas there's a tornado on the ground. So this is quite important to actually understand that communication is not always as we'd expect it to be, and there isn't a perfect world and there isn't a perfect scenario for things. And then one of the other things here to think about is that you think about those long lists there of, housing type, disability, poverty, all those together collectively compound the problem. So you almost have compound social vulnerabilities. So it's not just one. And then what this tends to do as well is unevenly load higher risk on those populations, and perhaps less risk on the more well-off populations, which means that through their insurance, through the financial mechanisms, through their social networks and political networks, they're able to bounce back and be more resilient much quicker. And so this is something that we need to know, but we need to know how much that this this impacts things. So I hope that wasn't too boring for people. If you already know it, I do apologize. But what I want to say now is that this then creates this idea of a wicked problem. So a wicked tornado problem is one thing, but let's just define wicked problems. Issues where there's no one single solution or one solution set that can resolve them. And I know this is sort of slightly academic language, dynamically complex issues where multiple agencies, well, we can understand that enough, our stakeholders and population groups are impacted differently, as we've just been suggesting with the social vulnerability piece, but also having various agendas and strategies to solve the problem. Whose strategy and agenda actually gets through, and does that help the most vulnerable in our societies? Well, if they don't have that political access, those social networks, the power relations and power dynamics that sometimes exist, it makes it more difficult. It's not impossible, but more difficult. But then breaking that down into kind of more plain language, how is risk communicated? But not just how is it communicated, where is it communicated, and in what language is it communicated? Not everybody within the United States speaks English as their first language. I think something around 45 million households, I apologize, 45 million people across the nation speak Spanish at home, for instance. So if we're not having weather watches and warnings come out in those languages, it's a problem. But there's also more languages than that perhaps we need to be thinking about. Are the risks fully understood? Well, are the risks fully understood by the public? Do people kind of think it's not going to happen to me, or have an external locus of control? It's about God, luck, etc., rather than internal locus of control. It's my responsibility to do something about it. When these risks are understood, can people act on them? So if you're in a mobile manufactured home, for instance, do you get that information early enough? And do you have choices about where you can go? Are there shelters? Are there public shelters? When are they open? When are they accessible? What rules do they have? Those sorts of things. How well these are communicated to people is something. And then also at the same time, excuse me, my light sensor goes off. At the same time, what other actions do people take? Are people going, right, I know where my safe space is, I'm getting into my safe space? Do they have it already prepared? If they're given enough warning, perhaps. If they're not giving enough warning, perhaps not. Were they paying attention in the watch, or was the watch something that was acknowledged? It may be, oh yeah, I see that, but it's for 6 hours. These things that make it really complex. And like, so what do we do next? Are we trying to narrow down what happens in the watch, and then heighten our communication of those risks during that time, and also the options that are available during that time as well? Because it's, I've seen so many times with warnings come out, and I understand why. If you're in a mobile manufactured home, get out now. But obviously, sometimes we think that that's too little, too late almost. And where are people going? So there are gaps in what we know, and that's okay. You can't know everything all of the time, but how do you close those gaps? Well, this is where the idea of like having a citizen science app came in, because I saw what the USGS had with their Did You Feel It apps when an earthquake occurs, and I was like, well, okay, well, why do we not have this for tornadoes? And so I brought this to the people that I work with, and they said, yeah, that's an issue. And when we did a little bit more research and a bit more digging, we discovered that actually less than 1% of tornadoes that occur annually are studied. Less than 1%. That means we don't know about 99% of the tornadoes that occur in this country. And I think that's an issue. So to put it into further context, each year there's more than 1,000 tornadoes impacting communities across the United States. If you take 2.5 people in the household across 44,000 houses, you get around about 111,000 people. To put that in football terms, and I'm going to call on OU here, that's about 1.5 OU football stadiums on big game days when there's a huge game full of people who are exposed to tornadoes every year. But how people receive, interpret, respond to the information that we are giving them in good faith is not necessarily well known. We know parts of the story, we don't know all of the story, and we need to engage the public to help us help them. We know so much, we think we're communicating the right things, but are there nuances that we're missing out on? Are there things that are not getting through? Or are the public unable to act for whatever reasons? And this could be social vulnerabilities that means that impinges on their survivability outcomes. So I'm going to show you another slide. We don't capture stories unless we ask people for their stories, unless we ask people for their experience. Now, I'm going to have to read this one out. I apologize that it's small. A couple of years back, I was doing a review of public tornado shelters across Mississippi and Alabama. And when I say review, I was going to publicly source places, its own website, and finding out where are the tornado shelters for this county or for this region, etc. And then I was taking that information, I was going to Google, and I was verifying the information. And I'd verify it two ways. I'd use the satellite top-down view, the plan view, and I'd also use Street View when that was available. In fact, I've contacted Google about this, and they liked what I was doing. And quite interestingly, I told them that a lot of their Street View was out of date, and they've updated a lot of it. So a lot of their Street View is a lot more up to date now, which I'm really pleased about. But this brought me to the Leesburg Police Department, and it had a review, and I was like, okay, what is that? So I clicked on the review, and I want to read something that is part of the review out so you can actually understand things, and then actually understand it in the context of the questions that I've got at the side. So this is from a member of the public, and please don't think I'm beating up on this particular police department or anything like that. I'm really not. It's just someone else's view of something that occurred to them. So it said, as a police officer, it is your job to protect lives. I cannot believe that I've been sitting in front of this tornado shelter right next to the police station for 20 minutes after calling and asking them to unlock it during severe weather. He even mentioned on the phone to speak up. The weather was so bad on his end, I guess he was standing outside observing the weather, he couldn't hear me. Our car has been nearly blown sideways several times. We live in a mobile home. We have no place to go. I felt secure in that my decisions before, but now that I'm still fearing for my family's lives outside of a locked tornado shelter next to a police station, that faith is gone. There was a car next to us with children in it in a full-blown panic. That's powerful. That is incredibly powerful. These people knew their risks. They understood their risks. They took what I would consider to be the appropriate action. They found out where the nearest local shelter was. They rang ahead and said, will it be open? But they arrived there. It wasn't opened. They couldn't get inside. They were frustrated. What does that do now? What have they learned? Have they learned to trust those authorities? Potentially not, and that's an issue. Were they complacent? They were not. They did all the right things. Were they aware of their vulnerability? Yes, they were. They knew that mobile manufactured homes was a weaker structure. And what stopped them from taking the right protective actions in this particular case was that they were not able to access what they thought they'd be able to access. But the big thing here is what social learning, good or bad, are they likely to share with their social network? Maybe other people who live, if it was in a mobile manufactured home park, are they going to tell that tale? Don't go there. It's a waste of time. And what sorts of things does that send out? What sort of kind of learning does that send out to people? So this brings us then to bringing sort of a rationale for why have the Tornado Tales Citizen Science Web Survey. We've mentioned the small sample size. If we went out and went and see people after every single event, it would be incredibly costly. It would be very, very difficult to kind of process all of that data, especially interviews. And so it would become too burdensome, but we wouldn't necessarily be getting a decent enough kind of level of detail from people. So what we decided to do was have something that was web-based. And when I say web-based, you can access this on a tablet, you can access it on a phone, you can access it on a computer. Respondents include the United States public who've recently been in or near a tornado. And what we say is, were you under a tornado watch or warning? Were you worried about tornadoes impacting your area? Those sorts of things. Apart from the actual working with our IT folk here to actually get this worked out and make sure that it was protected in the right way and we're protecting all the data, we also took 18 months to develop, while we were developing the tool, to take it through OMB, and they ask a series of questions, and then it's let out for the public comment for a while, and then you have to go through all these processes. That's because it's the National Severe Storms Laboratory collecting the data. We've also have going through sort of OMB, IRB collection for for researchers working with this here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a little small video. Basically, it's just like going through the site. So I'm going to talk you through what it is. So this is the front page. This is the landing page that you might go to, and it's got a map, and that's often populated with tornadoes that have occurred. So as I go through, I'm just sort of scrolling through that there. So one of the things is, it tells you what it does. And then there's a frequently asked questions box in the top right. And then just clicking on those just drops those things down so that, people can generally have their information sort of replied to. So if you click on take the survey, there's a couple of ways of doing this. You can actually put in an address or zip code. And we had this working so that it was working on a map, so you could drag a little tornado icon to where you were, and then you'll notice it's populating longitude and latitude as they're doing that. And then you say, where were you when the event occurred? If you put at home, it says what sorts of places. Work gives you different options, and school gives you different options. Did you receive a warning? Well, if you did receive it, how did you receive that information? Was it one thing? Was it all of these things? And we wanted to show all of these things because often they come through simultaneously. So just saying one thing kind of causes a bit of a problem. And then similarly, did you seek additional information? What did you do? Did you move to, like in this case, to the most sheltered part of the building, but didn't move somewhere else? Did you receive a tornado watch? Again, it's a useful thing. Similar responses, and again, able to give multiple responses there. And then when you got that watch, again, what did you do during that time, if you did something? And then we take some, basic demographic things there. That box at the bottom is incredibly important. That is the verbatim box. Tell us anything you'd like about this particular event. This is where we get the stories from people that actually, that's important. And by the way, if you stepped away from the server, we had it set up so you could either reset the survey or resume where you were. And that's only held on people's local computers on their cookies. It's not held by us. So if they don't submit that, we don't then try and take their partial data or things like that. So that's essentially what it is. We're going to explore a little bit more about what happens when we get that information next as well. There you go. So one thing we also have to do is communicate this with the public. And this is really important, how we communicate this. I mean, this is a comic strip that we've used. We've put on posters and things like that to show people, like I'm talking with you today, why do we do this? Why is it important? Why do we need your information? And also, what do we try and do with this information? And if there are any people here today from like broadcast media and also emergency managers, getting the information out that this tool is available to the public and we want them to fill this in is incredibly important. And there's a little extract of comic strip here actually says, what happened when 2 tornadoes hit Kansas City about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. They put it on their website. We got 90 responses in 20 minutes, and that was incredibly useful. And I'm going to take you through some of that data now as well to show, that these things mix up, come together. So on this little map page here, there's the approximate tornado track there, and it shows broadly, and you are not allowed to zoom in too far, by the way, in the map, but it shows broadly where people were. And so, it provides this instant feedback. We know that people are filling it in. We know that people in the right area are filling it in as well. And so now what I can do is bring you to kind of 3 case studies. And again, I'm not going to go into massive detail about these, but you get an idea of how we're taking the data that we get, how we're processing that data, and then what we're doing with that. So the first thing we did in the past summer, I worked with a summer undergraduate in the research, who was a research intern, and we de-identified the data so that no PII would, PII, or private identifiable information, was shared. So sometimes respondents share more than they should. Here's my phone number. There's, you can contact me. And although we appreciate them wanting to do that and reach out, what we don't want to do is publish that. And then currently the NSSL holds the data, and it is cleared out of PII, and then that data is shared. We eliminate false reports or repetitive responses. Sometimes people press a button more times than they should. It's okay. They're not meaning to be, to throw the data off. But when we recognize that it's an identical thing with identical verbatim information at the end, then we realize that's the case. We identified 3 statistically significant events and then limited reports to within a day or so of things. So the events that we chose were April 29th, 2022 in the evening in Andover, Kansas City, June the 8th, Kansas City and Buckner, Missouri, and February 26th in Norman. They're all in the evening and overnight periods, which is kind of important to think about. And that's why we honed down on those. We had statistically significant sample sizes, but we could actually say, oh, they're also in the evening. And remember, if you go back to the work of Walker Ashley at the beginning there, it talked about nocturnal tornadoes, about not being confident about getting that information as well as actually the problems with nocturnal tornadoes. So you can see here what was mapped were every little dot on the screen there is a tornado tail that someone has done. The polygons are literally taken from the National Weather Service polygons and overlaid. And what we can see here is a little pattern appearing, and I'm going to zoom in on one particular one, which is Overland Park in Kansas, near Kansas City and Buckner, Missouri. And so what we've got here are the polygons, and then you've got all the dots, which are the tornado tails. Some of them you'll notice are outside of the warning polygon. That's because they, in this particular event, didn't get, they were not in the tornado warning, but the tornado had already passed them. It had already been down on the ground and passed through where they were. And you can see that by the black line. I know it's not very, but along this black line is the actual path of the tornado. What you can also see, by the way, is the path of the tornado and the accuracy of the polygon that was warned. So that they put that pretty much in the center of both of those, which I think is very, very impressive, by the way. So that gives us, so we can start digging into these things and actually seeing what people did and didn't do. We can compare this to different models, such as the protection action decision model, which shows how people think about you know, kind of have pre-contemplation and then contemplate and then act on things. Milling, Wood and Durham. So milling, the idea is that you kind of, you get a warning and you go, is it going to impact me? Do I need to, is it definitely me? Is there someone else? You know, we do these sorts of things. And then the idea of transformative learning. What do people learn from the event? Has it changed how they think about severe weather? Has it changed how they prepare? Have they now got more than one way of receiving that weather information? Are they just relying on WEAs to come through, wireless emergency alerts on their phone, or have they also got a backup with a radio, or are they tuned into the local weather? These are the things that we can start to sort of unpick with things. So these are preliminary results and discussion from these events. It's not been peer reviewed yet. We're sort of in the process of writing things up. But warning reception rates. Now, just one thing I'm going to show you. On the far right there, warning reception rates. This is Norman, Oklahoma. I'm in Norman, Oklahoma at the National Weather Center. If that doesn't tell you something about weather saliency and how people experience and think about the weather, then nothing should. So maybe the large numbers of people getting the warning is one, it was warned and people got that warning and they were aware of it. I was in this event. I was in the OU parking garage because there was a couple of things coming through. The first one looked like it was near Moore, and I was like, okay. And then something else was spinning up, and I got all my family together, and I literally a week before bought a brand new car. Never bought a brand new car in my life. Didn't want it dinged by hail, so I went to the OU parking garage. Lots and lots of warnings went off on my phone as we were there, and also lots of sirens going off there. So not surprising at all. Again, though, if you notice that middle one that we've just been talking about, 28%, almost a third of people didn't get that warning. Well, it's borne out, isn't it, by the data and those little, where those tornado tails came through and where people told us that they didn't get that. So we can start to actually unpick these sorts of things. Sources for warnings. This is really important. Automatic text, sirens, okay, important. Certainly, I remember getting those. Broadcast radio, way down the list now. Very few people are sort of listening to that. Less NOAA weather radio than I would have liked, especially for the time of night and things like that. A little bit of word of mouth, internet. So in other words, maybe there was some kind of, they just happened to be on a certain page or something came up into their social feeds at that time as well. But what we're starting to see is that those technologies come forward. Now, there's something that's missing from here. And this is something that we are iterating on. Apps, we've not mentioned weather apps and things like that, particularly in this. We've now changed that, and the next iteration will have these things in there. So this is something that, like I said, we're learning as we're going on as well. We don't think it's the perfect product at all times. It is the first iteration of a product that then we're starting to develop and iterate on as time goes on. Warning response, again, I'm going to sort of say that, we look at February 26th in Norman, everyone said that they took protective action. Again, 31% said that they didn't take protective action in that June 8th. But that corresponds really closely to the 28% that were outside of the warning, that the tornado had passed them by that time. So that is not that, kind of surprising. So that means that actually the ones that were left that did take protective action were probably warned and took protective action. That's a good thing. Generally, we're seeing people take protective action when they get a warning, when they feel that they've acknowledged that and they've received that warning, then they're taking protective action. Again, there were some people outside of that warned area on the April 29th event. So again, we can start digging into these sorts of things. What we need to know is what people are doing and what they don't do. So most people went to the most secure area. Now, when we talk about this is an interior wall, interior bathroom, especially in kind of like permanent site-built homes. So people tended to move that and move their family into those areas as well. And more people are telling us also that they're using like cycle helmets or football helmets for the kids and things like that to try and protect those. Monitoring the situation is quite an interesting one because it's not necessarily. It is an action, but it's not like diving to your safe space kind of action. And it might have been because they pulled up the radar on their phones or things like that and said, oh, no, that's way northwest of us. I don't, those sorts of things. I think we all do that. I think that's human. I think it's a perfectly acceptable form of milling because especially if it's occurring in the overnight hours, which some of these were, at what point are you, kind of in bed, and you're getting the warning, and it's like it's making you worried or anxious about those sorts of things. One thing that I think is a little bit concerning, though, is the complete lack of storm shelters in each of the three events. One person in April 29th, one person June 8th, one person February 26th. Sorry, excuse me. Four persons February 26th in Norman were in storm shelters. I think what we also need to dig down into here as well is sort of what sort of structures people are in as well. And the survey tells that, and we're trying to dig more into that. We did learn that from across the event, there was a high proportion of respondents receiving the warnings during the evening events compared to the early morning or the overnight hours. That is not surprising, is it? Because most people are potentially asleep. One of those was at 1 in the morning. And so people are sleeping at that point. Maybe they got their phones on silence. Maybe they turn their phones off. It's very hard to sort of dig down into those things, but it starts as making us ask those questions and think about those things more, which I think is a positive thing. And as we saw from the data there, those automatic test alerts were the most common form of warning source. I think that's really useful, but I can report out from the work that we did in Rolling Fork, and Tracy Sempier, who's on the call here, actually went and did this field work with me. We spoke to 18 people there, and 16 out of those 18 did not get any warning on their phones or anything like that. Informal warnings got through. And it doesn't mean that things weren't issued. It doesn't mean that the weather service didn't do their job. They did, but they didn't get into the hands of the people that they were supposed to. And that's concerning. And I'm still trying to dig down into that a little bit more and find out exactly why that is. But when differences in warning section are accounted for, there is little difference in the proportion of people taking that protective action. So I think that that's a positive thing. People know what the protective actions are, and they're reporting that they're taking it. Now, the only caveat with that is, of course, is people are self-reporting. So they're telling you, what they did, and if they're taking the survey, perhaps they're interested in weather generally and wanting to improve those sorts of things. So there are always people that maybe don't get drawn in by these sorts of surveys, and that's a challenge I think that we've got going forward as well. How do we get other people involved and wanting to take this survey? And I guess that's where some of you on the call here might actually play a really key role here. How do we get this into different populations' hands so that we're not getting the same people with the same education all the time answering these things? So this is something that's definitely a challenge. Certainly moving people to a secure location and moving families to a secure location, whether it's a bathroom, whether it's an interior room, closet, etc., was the most reported thing. And actually, because of the overnight hours, again, not surprising as well. It's dark outside. You're probably not going to go and search for other means of doing things. This is an example. We put this into a story map, which means that you can have a look at the QR code that's on the screen now and use your phone to actually do something with that. And also there's a bit.ly there as well. And so each one of these little green dots there, generally, not all of them, are people's responses that they put in there. And then it's their little bit of the story that we've put in there. By the way, it says locations are not precise. I want to kind of underline this. Identifying information removed to protect respondent privacy, and the tornado warning data is courtesy of Iowa Environmental Mesonet. So that's really important to kind of be able to help you to kind of dig down and actually look for yourself after this call has ended, because you can actually see what we're trying to do. Now, this is one form of doing things. It's a good form of communication. It helps the public understand those sorts of things. So it is a very public facing thing. And that's why we strip out all of this other information as well. But the more data we get over time, well, I think that then we're going to get more data demands on us as a sort of an institution to be sharing that, and rightly so, with other academics and other places as well. I mentioned other events. We've gone out to the field 3 times. We've been out to the Quad State tornado that occurred in December 2021. We went to the Idabel tornadoes, and we went out to Rolling Fork and Amory and the tornadoes there. And what we've done is we've used the same question set, but we use that in a semi-structured manner, and then we ask questions of the public, and we try and guide them through that. When were you first aware of severe weather, and then taking them through, whether they received a watch and when that was, and how they got it, and then whether they got a warning and what they did, and then what they did and how they sheltered and how safe they felt as well during those times. So we have reported this out, and there's a couple of examples here we've reported out to the 103rd AMS meeting, and you'd be able to find these online. We will make the PowerPoint available at the end of the day as well. And that helps us to iterate and take those questions and say, what works? What confuses people? What is phrased maybe in an awkward way? And we've already started to, try and iterate on these things now. So again, this is a call to action for you on the call today as well, to help us. We're iterating right now. We are going through, we've got the Tornado Tales as is. That will stay that as we go through all these iteration process, and we build a new version, and as we go through the OMB process. But, we will need people when tornado events occur to actually push that out to the media, to put it in NWS chat, those sorts of things, so that then we are getting those reports, because that helps us understand what happened in that particular event, because all these events are very, very different, as I'm sure you know. So that initial Tornado Tales web instrument had about 483 verified surveys. We had some people trying to throw stuff off. You always get stuff like that, especially when you launch something new. They are being analysed on an event basis. So like I said, we've looked at, and we've started those events that I've shared here. I'm now wanting to look at, there was an event in Tennessee recently, and we got about 60 reports there, which again, I think is statistically significant enough to look at what happened in that particular event. So we've been iterating already a couple of times. We've changed some of the technology behind the scene. We are currently changing some of those questions. A lot of them are staying the same, but we're also asking questions about weather saliency and things like that. How do people feel emotionally about weather, about what they can and can't do, how big an impact is weather on their lives. So we're starting to broaden a little bit of what we're doing there as well. It is tricky when you are iterating on this. The temptation is, let's have all the questions, but then that takes all the time, and so people kind of get turned off from it. So we're trying to strike that balance between, asking things that are really useful for the weather service and for the science, but also asking it in a way that actually people don't feel too much time burden is on their hand, because part of that OMB process is actually saying, how long does it take? And each 10-minute or 5-minute or 6-minute or 7-minute or whatever long a survey might be is given an economic value. So that's something that I think that we're aware of. In the future, we would love to develop a Spanish language version. Like I said, 46 million Americans speak Spanish at home. It would be nice to launch that over the next iteration. We may or may not get a chance to do that. It comes down to all sorts of things like funding and time. And then if you are asking all these questions in Spanish, you need someone who speaks Spanish to be able to then take them and actually do something with that data as well. So these are the directions that we're thinking of going in rather than anything else. So with that, we're at 1:43. I wanted to leave around about 15 minutes for questions. This is my contact information. There is the direct link to the QR code to Tornado Tales there, which means you can take the survey yourself if you need to. There's also a QR code for my X, formerly Twitter, because that's quite useful to get hold of me sometimes. And then my email here at OU, and also my NOAA email address as well. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to leave my slides up so that I can flick forward or back through them should you have specific questions about specific slides. Thank you very much.
All righty. Excellent presentation, Justin. Thank you so much for that. If you have a question, you can go ahead and leave it in the Q&A box. I'll also keep an eye on the chat box as well if you want to leave it there. In the meantime, Justin, I have a question. Is there an optimal time for people to complete the survey? So say they're not able to fill out the survey on the day of the weather event. Would that information still be helpful or useful a week later?
Absolutely. And in fact, when we go into the field, we usually leave it a good 2 months or so. Certain data is perishable in the field, but And obviously over time, people's memories might change of a you know, particular event. But we don't want to jump on people and say, right, you must do this right now, because we don't know the impact on people. You know, they might be kind of tidying up and clearing things out if it's been a particularly bad event for them. But yeah, any time afterwards is absolutely fine. And, you know, we've even got the ability for people to put in things from the past as well, because, you know, maybe it was a very, very impactful storm for them at that time. Now, I've not got examples of this, but if someone put in something from the outbreak in 1974, I imagine how things were communicated then and how things are communicated now are very, very different. And so actually just understanding those things from a historical perspective, as well as from the academic now perspective of what happens in the watch to warning continuum and how people respond to those warning messages and how they're communicated is all really important. So we're not just taking kind of a very narrow view, we're trying to take a broad view and then see where the data takes us. So yeah, that's an excellent question, but yes, you can do it, you know, a couple of months later and it really wouldn't impact things. What's important is you remember the date. What we tend to do when we filter these things, so the data that I was showing you earlier on, we kind of go minus and plus one day from the event, because sometimes get confused. Was it the 15th or the 16th? And we kind of want to know that. If they're dragging the tornado icon there, or if they're telling us their zip code, kind of gives us an idea that, oh yeah, they were talking about that particular event. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Also, what is the best way for emergency managers, weather service staff, and other professionals to get the word out about tornado tales?
I mean, I think using the communication that works best for you. So I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. I'm going to say that, like, you know, what works best for you. For some people, these are Facebook things. Some people, it's YouTube things. You know, sometimes it's local media markets as well, and broadcast meteorologists are very, very important in this role as well. The thing is, we'd like this to be discussed in NWS chat, and then people go, oh, don't forget to tell so and so, or so, you know, to fill out this survey, because I think that's, you know, the only way that we're really going to get the responses that I think this really deserves, because I think that, you know, the more we know, the more we can actually change or tweak messaging or understand more about some of the challenges that people face. And another, or how did they negotiate those? And are there real great lessons in there that can be shared with other places that also have the same challenges of social vulnerabilities? You know, is someone somewhere just doing something that's so smart that we've just not even thought of doing? So anyway, I hope that answers that. So use what you know, but if you want to come to us, we do also have a little bit of media packs and things like that we can share with people as well. Tracy has those, I know, and Christiana has those as well, and they were developed here in the lab to help people to do that.
Thank you. And is there a way to provide additional incentives to people for completing this survey other than contributing to the research?
You see, I mean, that's an excellent question. It's a really good point. I think my answer is that really depends on what sort of funding there is for things. At the moment, you know, there's been some funding for this, but that funding is basically being kind of people's time. And, you know, obviously I'm funded as a research scientist. So don't get me wrong. This is something I see this is key to my role and what I do. But in terms of the public, yeah, it would be nice to offer more of an incentive. And I don't know what the answer is to that. You know, I mean, I know there are things like gift certificates and things like that, but it's like, do we have X number a year, or do you know what I mean? Those sorts of things. So it creates, I'm sure, some challenges for things when we have this, and also, and I might be wrong here, I don't know what the rules are on this when it's government collecting data. So I don't know what the rules are on that. I'm going to sort of hold my hand up to my ignorance there, but perhaps someone else on the call knows about that and can actually chip in, and that's good.
Okay. I have a couple of questions from participants. One says, over the past few decades, what changes have you seen with disaster impact due to changes in the disasters themselves versus population density in areas where disasters such occur? Are you able to see that?
Yeah, I'm not able to see the question, but I think really here, I think that it's certainly within tornadoes, the work of Dr. Stephen Strader has done a lot of work here looking at what he calls like the bullseye. So in other words, we've got urban areas becoming almost what we'd call in the UK conurbations, you know, sort of spreading out, even getting bigger and bigger. I could give an example here, for instance. Norman to Moore to Oklahoma City almost seem to merge into one big blob as you go down Highway 35. And I think that, you know, that provides some worrying some worries really about what the impacts would be if there was a direct hit on any of those communities that were heavily populated. Tornadoes glanced here in that Norman event here compared to what it could have been, and it certainly wasn't as big magnitude as, say, the Mayfield, Kentucky tornado, or the one that impacted Rolling Fork. Rolling Fork, I have to say, you know, had a really big impact on me on you know what I saw 2 months later, and Tracy and I went out and hearing the stories, and we felt very privileged to hear those stories, but it was such a small community. I dread to think what would have happened had it hit a very large community in an urban area, and the ability of the people to protect themselves. I'd say that one of the more concerning things is that sheltering has changed over the years. There are less shelters than there used to be. And how we communicate how people shelter and where they should shelter and when they should shelter has, I think, helped people make decisions a bit earlier. And I think that is potentially saving lives right now. And I think that that's an area that we need to build on those successes. Now, we've not solved it all, and that's what this is about. This is about what are we missing? So I think that I hope that answers your questions. Definitely look at the work of Dr. Stephen Strader and others. I think Walker Ashley has done some work in this area with him as well, to actually understand, you know, this, you know, what happens when you get hazards impacting larger urban areas. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And can participants access this PowerPoint presentation afterwards?
I think that we will be sharing it. Yes, I sent it to you guys this morning. It won't have the video in because it just doesn't, it's too big a file size, but there's be a version without the little video of, you know, the website. But the website itself, you know, if you wanted to share that with people and, you know, want to share the part of the presentation, but also the website, just send them to the website and they can actually, you know, experiment and use the website themselves, you know.
Awesome, thank you. If anyone else has any questions that they want answered before we wrap up, you can go ahead and leave that in the question and answer box or the chat box. I'll give a moment for you to submit your questions.
I also want to say, if people don't ask a question now, because sometimes it can be a bit scary, please feel free to reach out to me at any of those email addresses on the screen there. I'd be happy to answer your queries or any questions that you may have.
Alrighty, and his information is at the bottom of this slide that's showing right now. So definitely reach out if you have any questions that come to mind afterwards. Thank you for that, Justin. Alrighty, if we don't have any more questions, we can go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining, learning more about our tool, Tornado Tales tool. Definitely spread the word, because this tool is going to help with some very important issues that need to be addressed concerning severe weather.